Good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew Clark, and I wish you a warm, home-based learning welcome today to our webinar this morning, Avoiding Greenwash, How to Tell Your Sustainability Story with Credibility. I hope that we're all dealing sufficiently with this new round of lockdown that we have here in Singapore, and for those of you who are embarking or re-embarking on home-based learning today, my commiserations. Thankfully, I get to get out of the first few hours of it by being able to come to the office to moderate this panel. The panel has been organised by the Marketing and Communications Committee in collaboration with the Sustainability Committee at the British Chamber under the Road to Net Zero campaign. And to give you a little overview of our committee, the Marketing and Communications Committee, I'm the co-chair and Suzy is the chair of the committee, and we exist to keep British Chamber members and the broader business community in Singapore updated with the latest research, trends and technology in the Marcom sector, to provide industry best practice and showcase the individual capabilities of members via Chamber initiatives and through the development of its own events, seminars and shareable content, of which this is one of the bits of content that we're producing. And today we've got a fantastic panel with us. And our aim in this event, which is to really try to get to the bones of kind of what greenwash is and how we can better tell our stories and tell our stories with credibility, is basically the aim is to try and get some practical and useful information out there in the discussion that we're about to have, and basically to communicate our sustainability and achievements in a way that enhances our reputation and avoids us being accused of greenwashing. So let's move on to our panel. First, we've got Suzy, who is the chair of the Marketing and Communications Committee, the brains behind this event. She's also director for MullenLowe Sustainability. She built the sustainability practice last year. And it's a specialist practice managed as part of strategic communications agency MullenLowe Salt. Her aim with the practice is to build better businesses by offering a range of services to businesses at all stages in their sustainability journey, including industry and competitor assessment, report creation, internal and external communications, and partnership brokering. Tapping into its extensive network of partners, the team also provides niche and technical expertise as part of its end-to-end sustainability support service. Thanks for joining us today, Suzy. We've got a journalist in the room. It's Robin Hicks. He's lived and worked in Asia for 13 years in Hong Kong, Australia and Singapore, with 28 years of experience in journalism, writing about media, government, technology and sustainability. He's now the deputy editor of Eco Business, which covers the latest trends in sustainability in Asia Pacific. He has a particular interest in plastic pollution, palm oil trade and Southeast Asia's energy transition. Welcome today, Robin. We have Dr. Darian Mcbain, who is Global Director of Corporate Affairs and Sustainability at Thai Union. Now, her previous work includes serving as the Sustainable Procurement Lead for the United Kingdom's National Health Service, advising the United Nations, working with WWF on palm oil and supply risk analysis, and heading her own strategy and sustainability consultancy. And she has a long list of accolades, which we won't go through, but what we will call out is the fact that last year she was one of Fast Company's most creative people in business for 2020. And finally, welcome today, Darian. And finally, we have Tom Peacock Nazil, who's founder and CEO of 7 Clean Seas. Now, after moving to Singapore in 2013 with his wife, Pamela, Tom was increasingly upset with the level of plastic pollution in Southeast Asia as a whole. And after one particularly eye-opening trip to Thailand, Tom and Pamela made the decision to start hosting educational coastal teams team-ups in Singapore with the hope of highlighting the issue of ocean plastic pollution. Tom can be best described as an accidental environmentalist. Hopefully we'll find out what that means later on. And after quitting the rat race to pursue his passion, is now championing the responsible plastic usage movement full-time at 7 Clean Seas. And Tom recently won the UN World Tourism Organization Global Startup Champion, Sustainable Development Goal 14, Life Below Water. Hopefully we can find out a bit more about that, but congratulations, Tom. Welcome. So I think that what we should do to get going on this is to go to Robin. And I think that we should really try and kick off this conversation with a question that's certainly burning in my mind. And I think that we'll be able to help set things up quite nicely for our discussion. And also, before we get going as well, let me encourage you, please, if you have any questions, to use the Q&A function, please, because we'd love to take some questions from the audience. So, Robin, how do you spot greenwash, and why are companies doing it?
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, tricky question. So, yeah, as you alluded to in the intro, I'm sort of fed on a daily diet of green marketing. And my job is to filter, I suppose, the genuinely interesting corporate change stories from the greenwash. And we've seen an absolute torrent of it since COVID. I think it's sort of understandable, right? I mean, companies now feel that they have to talk about sustainability, whether they're good at it or not. For some, it's a genuinely good opportunity to talk about why they're part of the solution at a time when there's so many problems: climate change, pandemics, plastic pollution, inequality. And there's, of course, I think there's the risk of looking like you're left behind if you don't talk about it. And I think that some companies get their stories right, but some companies get the stories wrong. And that's why we're seeing quite a lot of greenwash. So onto how to spot it. It's tricky, right? It really is. But there are a few sort of pointers. If the claim that a company is making is way outside of their field of expertise and is what is in sustainability jargon material to their business, that's possibly a red flag. Do they have any believable, credible data to back up that claim? If they don't, that's another red flag. Has the company spent a ridiculous amount of marketing behind that claim? That's another red flag. And I've referred to an ancient example from 1999, actually, of BP, picking on a British company, when it rebranded from BP to Beyond Petroleum. And Greenpeace ran a campaign that showed that they'd spent more on rebranding themselves than they did in investing in renewable energy. So that's a classic greenwash example. Also, which jobs are driving sustainability? When I look at a company, I tend to look at where the sustainability department sits. If it sits, and it's not obviously a blanket rule that applies to everyone, but if the sustainability department sits alongside marketing and advertising, that's also a red flag. So it shows that sustainability is sort of interwed with the corporate messaging, perhaps rather than the core of the company. Another way to spot it is it tied in with a particular day of the year, like Earth Day, International Women's Day? That's when you see a torrent of greenwash. That's also a red flag. And also, finally, awards. Is a company doing it, in your view, is a company doing it to win some sort of award? Because that, again, for me at least as a journalist, that's another red flag.
That's very interesting. Thanks very much. I was thinking maybe we could spin over to Suzy. So we've got the kind of background of perhaps how you can spot greenwash. But, there are companies out there that have a genuine ambition and are genuinely doing good work in the area of sustainability. Suzy, in terms of your experience on the kind of strategic thinking and strategic comms side, What do you do with companies that have a genuine interest in talking about sustainability or perhaps promoting the sustainable things they're doing, who might be afraid about doing so for the reasons that Robin's been talking about?
Thanks, Andrew. And it was interesting because all of the red flags that Robin mentioned are also the same red flags that we look out for when we first start talking to a company. I think one of the positive outcomes of COVID and the situation last year, and unfortunately into this year, is that the issues around sustainability have been really highlighted. So it is now seen as a must do. It is not just a nice to do. Unfortunately, that doesn't always translate into doing it properly. And what we find with the companies that we talk to is that the majority that we talk to, there is a genuine desire to get it right. But what we often see is that within the company itself, they don't have the experience, the solid sustainability technical experience to actually get those commitments and policies in place. And then nor do they really know how to, once they're on that journey, how to talk about their sustainability achievements in a way that is honest, transparent, authentic, that isn't just anchored, as Robin said, to a certain day of the year, or, which is very surface and crucially not linked to materiality. We have a lot of conversations with clients who are, we want to talk about climate change. Well, that's a really big thing. Like, what do you do as a business? What are you producing? What sector are you in? What are the areas where you could actually have a real impact, rather than just trying to tick all of the SDG boxes. So there is a rise in demand for companies and a rise in desire for companies to want to talk about their sustainability achievements, but most still find it challenging. And that's not just small companies, that is also big MNCs.
And on that subject of big MNCs, I mean, Darian, in your role working for a big MNC, can you relate to what Suzy is talking about?
Definitely, but I think it is about communicating what is genuine. And the point that Robin raised about materiality is very important. What is material to you, but also the data. So I always live by the rule of, you can say what you're going to do, but then you have to do it before you then communicate it. And so my principle for communicating on sustainability is, if we don't have the indicators behind it, if we don't have the evidence, then we shouldn't be communicating it. And I think we're seeing a lot of pressure for companies to make big, bold claims, for example, around net zero or carbon zero, to do with climate change. It's such an important topic. It is important to almost every business, but to do the hard work that goes behind that, it can take months or years just to set those targets. And so my advice would be, you need to really have your plans, know what you want to achieve before you start communicating it, and then really don't communicate until you've got some of that evidence. And that is difficult in the face of a lot of pressure to communicate. And then it does probably depend where someone sits, the sustainability team within an organization. I'm very fortunate at Thai Union. I report to the CEO and I'm on the leadership team. So they have embedded sustainability into the way they do business. But depending on where the sustainability team will sit, you will have a different influence and outcome. And I think greenwashing can also be used the other way, not just by businesses, but by, let's say, NGOs and civil society, false claims to make things seem worse than they are. But that can equally be just as bad, because that's giving a false impression of what the current situation is, usually to draw some attention to it. And so really, no matter which place you're sitting at, whether you're government, whether you're civil society or business, I think that honesty and communication, and that we're on this journey rather than everything is solved, is very important to sustainability communications and making sure that you don't greenwash.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I think it's time to turn to Tom and find out. Tom, I really want to find out, what is the UN World Tourism Organizational Global Startup Champion? What is that, and how did you win it?
Yeah, thanks for having me, first of all. It's a global competition. They actually had 10,000 applicants, so we're pretty fortunate to have been picked for SDG 14. And they basically try and find a startup that's kind of really making progress for each of the 17 SDGs. And for SDG 14, we were fortunate enough to win, mainly because we've really been working hard, and I know Robin knows this very well, over the last 3 years to kind of get to the crux of ocean plastic pollution from a financing perspective, because it's fair to say there's no shortage of people like me in the world that want to fix a particular problem, but there is a shortage of funding. So it was about getting back to the roots of funding to come up with some innovation there. And it seems to be getting us some accreditation, which is great. In terms of kind of my market, my segment of ocean kind of cleanup that everybody seems to have seen and jumped on the bandwagon, which is a good thing for, particularly for awareness. There is, dare I say, it's a wash with greenwashing. It is absolutely filled to the brim. Now, whether that is giant companies doing awareness programs rather than actually doing anything else, particularly around specific days like World Ocean Day, like Robin mentioned earlier, that is a red flag, and we see it all the time. People reaching out who want to do an awareness campaign. It's all right, great, but like, what are you doing? And then Darian's brought up these kind of big bold claims around net zero and from a carbon perspective, but that's happening in the plastic world as well. You know, every single company, I think there was a major tire company that came out the other day, yesterday, are coming out and saying we want to have 50% recycled PET or polymers in our products, which is okay, cool. You want this, but everybody else does as well. There's already a massive shortage of PET in the world, and it's a completely unachievable target. But when you put a 10-year time frame on a target like that, it's almost like passing the buck. I'm pretty sure these CEOs that sign off these targets are not going to be CEOs of these companies when that deadline rolls around. So there is so much work to do, and yeah, it feels like maybe it is since COVID, there has just been this onslaught of greenwashing, and it's getting worse.
And just to stick with you, Tom, on that, I mean, I'm very interested in what 7 Clean Seas actually does. I mean, it sounds to me as though there's a huge opportunity for you and the work that you do to partner with big organizations and organizations like you're talking about, so that you can add credibility to their efforts. Would that be a fair thing to say? And is this a minefield, or is this an incredible opportunity for you to navigate your way through?
It's an incredible opportunity laden with mines. I think that's the only way to put it. In terms of kind of what we're trying to achieve, it's stopping plastic pollution. So we need to build infrastructure, onshore infrastructure, waste management where there is no waste management. That's how you make a difference in developing locations. And then what we need to do is find income. And for us, that came in the form of plastic credits, you know, developing this new market that we can go to very big players as well as small and medium-sized players and say, look, guys, you have a necessary plastic footprint. Can we offset that and generate capital to invest in our projects? But at the same time as carbon offsetting can be used entirely for greenwashing, actually so can plastic offsetting. And this is something that we were hyper aware with from the start, but recently it's become more and more of a concern. And what we've actually done is invest internally in the organization and hired a environmental engineer so that we can start working with companies on a consultancy basis, offering kind of waste auditing services to get the data, like what are you using today? Set out some kind of long-term goals that are achievable, so help people with reduction strategies before we look at the offsetting. So I think there's a lot of I guess responsibility falls on the big players to make the right decision. But I think as product providers and solution providers, we actually shoulder a lot of responsibility as well to make sure that we're not just selling, you know, just shifting credits to people that we know are going to use it for greenwashing. You know, we've got to shoulder that responsibility.
Fascinating. Thanks very much. I think it would be good to go back to Suzy here. And can I remind everybody, we would love to see some questions. So if If anybody has any questions, please pop them into the Q&A box, which is on the bottom of the Zoom screen. Suzy, I mean, this is clearly a discussion where we're talking about credibility and how we can effectively and credibly communicate sustainability to our audiences. When a company approaches your sustainability practice, let's say, what sort of due diligence are you doing with them before you start working with them to communicate their sustainability plans?
Well, we have usually 2 sheets of questions that we want to ask them, and that can be everything around their materiality. It can be everything around existing commitments. Do they have science-based targets? What have they been putting out there previously? What are their sustainability commitments? What have they achieved so far? So lots and lots of questions, and then lots of landscape analysis to looking to see sort of what is happening in their sector, what's happening with other companies in their sector, where are the gaps, where are the potential red flags, where they might have gaps in what they're actually saying compared to what they're currently doing. So really trying to sort of establish in that first sort of phase, what does the landscape look like for them, and then advising from there. And that can take quite a long time, depending on how sort of mature the sustainability journey is with a company, or maybe they're just starting out. And quite often the ones that are just starting out are the easier to advise, because they want to start off doing it properly. We've got a client at the minute who is very honest and open about, they're very much at the start of their sustainability journey. They want to make sure they're doing it properly. They want to make sure that they're communicating it properly from the outset. And there's a lot of nervousness around that to put themselves out there. So it's our job to do that due diligence alongside them. And sometimes, you have to really challenge a company. And we have walked away from companies where we've identified massive gaps in their sustainability strategy. And we've said, yes, we'd love to help you, but you need to get your house in order first. We're not going to help you put out campaigns around something that you're asking consumers to do when you haven't done it yourself, or there's massive gaps in what you're saying you're doing. So that phase is quite complex, can be challenging, but ultimately really needs to happen before you can move on and help them communicate about what they're doing.
That's very interesting. I mean, it's interesting what you're talking about in terms of the landscape that they exist in, and if they understand that landscape, but also at the same time, if their house is in order kind of in the first place. And I guess that's probably a good question for Darian. Darian, just in the case of Thai Union, what does your landscape look like, and is your house in order?
So I don't know that anyone can ever claim to be perfect, but very much as Suzy said, when I joined Thai Union in 2015, it was kind of the bad boy of the seafood industry. So I should say Thai Union is one of the largest seafood processors in the world. And one of the first things I did was that landscape analysis. Which was a Singapore-based company, do an analysis of who was leading in sustainability in seafood and then in the food industry. And what it showed to me was that in seafood, there weren't really any clear leaders. Nobody had an integrated strategy, and that the broader food industry was ahead of seafood, which is where I got the idea for Sea Change, which is our sustainability strategy. But we built that up. So the pillars of Sea Change were the things that were most important to our stakeholders. So there's safe and legal labour, responsible sourcing, responsible operations, and people and communities. And under each of those pillars, we set goals. And there were 5-year goals, because you're right, if you set something for 2050, I wasn't going to be delivering that. And we were reporting on it each year to really show the transparency, to not say, ta-da, everything's solved because we have a plan, but to say, this is the progress we're making year on year. When we got to the end of the 5 years, which was 2020, reporting transparently on progress, and now setting that next 5-year journey. So I think it's iterative. I would be highly suspicious of any company that said all issues were resolved, because it's a dynamic space. You can resolve one issue this year and think, finally, I've put that issue to bed, and then another one will come up, or the situation will change and evolve. So I don't think anyone could ever claim to have things sorted, but certainly you can have the structures in place to deal with both the issues that you're trying to resolve and also to communicate on them.
Wonderful. That's very interesting. Actually, that what you were talking then in terms of setting targets for things is very in line with a question that we've just had from the audience, from Eva Sogbanmu. I hope I've got the pronunciation of your name right. I'm sorry if I didn't. And she's asking, many companies are setting targets far in the future, for example, 2030 to 2040. This is obviously necessary, but how can companies show that these are realistic and they have a path to achieve them when the current leadership won't be around to see them delivered? I think that that's probably, I think that it would be interesting. I mean, you've partly answered that question in terms of talking about your path to those targets a little bit, Darian, but I think it'd be interesting to get Robin's take on this, because you must experience this quite a lot as a journalist with companies that are setting on a different range of different levels targets for the future. And it's something that I'm sure everybody in the audience is very aware of in the language that's used by companies in their plans for targets for net zero, etc., etc. Perhaps you could give your point of view on Eva's question there, please, Robin.
Yeah, sure. So I think the general consensus has shifted quite recently that as to what makes a realistic or sort of target that we want. 2050, I think a lot of scientists and people in the industry would say is too late. It has to be 2030, which is more in line with the Paris Agreement on carbon reductions that we need to avoid catastrophic consequences from climate change, which, by the way, we're probably already facing. So, yeah, I mean, some just to pick on a company a little bit, that just because it was fairly recently, for example, Petronas, massive Malaysian oil company, they declared that they would be carbon neutral by 2050. Now, the minute that dropped to my inbox, just the question was how, right? And in the language, if you look at the language, they said it was an aspirational target. So realistically, I don't think they can get anywhere near it if they dramatically change their business model. And with that announcement came very little data, if anything. And if you look at their business, they've acquired one clean tech company in Singapore, but the rest of the business is oil and gas, right? So not sure if I answered your question, but the red flag was no data, and the timeline was very vague, and the language they're using was aspirational rather than science-based. So if a company doesn't have a science-based target in line with initiatives like the Science-Based Target Initiative, I think ordinary people, consumers should question what companies are telling them.
Yeah, very interesting. It's very interesting to hear your perspective in terms of the way that companies, that clearly there's an issue of the way that the language that organizations use in these different situations. I think maybe to go back to Darian, if I can. Darian, what's interesting, I think, in Eva's question as well, is the fact that, you know, what happens if the leadership changes? You clearly, in terms of your description of the work that you've been doing with Thai Union, your relationship with the senior management of the company is really important. What happens if that management changes?
So Thai Union is an interesting, a fascinating opportunity, really, because although it's a listed company, it's listed on the Stock Exchange of Thailand, it started out as a family company. It was three brothers who migrated from China to Thailand. They famously say they had the 3 zeros. They had no education, no money, and no finance, and they've built up this global empire. And because you've got family members still working, actually they do take a very sustainable long-term view. For them, it isn't just about a short-term CEO stint that might be, let's say, 4 years. It is the company, and already the current CEO is the son of one of those founding members. And so that helps with thinking, if we create a mess now, we will also be the same ones to clean it up. And it's not an opportunity that all companies have, but just fundamentally having that long-term view about how long we're around for does change the shift in how you address different issues. And I think particularly if you look at fish, and this relates to the oceans, you know, a fishery, which is where you get the fish from, it can be overfished, and that can happen quite quickly. And then there literally are no fish to catch. And so we've put a lot of effort into investing in fisheries to make sure that you can catch sustainably. And it's not just about getting a tick to put on your can of tuna, it is to make sure that the business can continue to operate. So it's the thinking of, well, how long do we want our business to be able to operate, that helps integrate sustainability into the way you do business.
Very interesting. Wondering if I can pop over to Tom. What's your experience from with the organisations that you might be working with in terms of what we've been talking about on the level of leadership? Generally, in your discussions with organisations and the work that you do, is the need for communicating sustainability, where does that come from? Does it come from the leadership? Does it come from elsewhere in the company? And the same kind of question that Eva's asking, what happens if that leadership changes?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think from my kind of direct experience, there's companies that want to kind of get into sustainability, push their sustainability message, but also kind of walk the talk. And they come from two backgrounds. So they've either got a existing sustainability department and policies in place, and they're going down that road already. So they've got they've got the skill set in-house to actually kind of make it happen, or they're the complete opposite and they're a completely new company that really, haven't done anything in sustainability. And this is something that we're seeing more and more. And it's great that they're starting this journey, and we want to help them in our specific segment go down that journey from first of all, where are you today? Okay, nothing. Then how do we start the journey incrementally and have some kind of long-term goal in there, so that you can get to a point in a few years where you can maybe start talking about this. And we do see that a lot, or we have seen that a lot over the last 2 years, which is worrying, because it means sustainability is just completely new to them, and it should have potentially been there for the last decade or 2 decades. But it's also kind of heartening to know that the market is pushing companies in that direction. Often we see, or I've seen that this is coming from champions within the business. We call them champions. So there are particular people who may not be in sustainability because the business doesn't have a sustainability department, who are fully on board with everything sustainable, and they push internally for their organization to make steps into that direction. And that, from our experience, is very good. It takes a long time, and it's kind of chipping away at it slowly, but it's very good for building that in-house push to move into a certain direction. And then you get the odd occasion where it's top down, and to be honest, when it's top down, it's almost immediate. If it's a company where people really kind of look up to the leadership and admire them, and for so many different reasons, one of kind of our clients comes to mind, who we work closely with, which is Howden Group Holdings. They're a big British insurance company, actually. And they've got a CEO in the UK. It's privately owned still, I think, called David Howden. And I think a while ago that he just decided that, sustainability now needs to be the core of our business. And this was maybe five plus years ago. And when you've got that kind of top down drive, and they're willing to throw themselves into everything, things really happen quickly, whether that's kind of becoming Corp B certified, looking at waste reduction, looking at carbon reduction and things like that. So I don't think there's one kind of shoe fits all. It's really on a case by case basis. And if it's not the leadership, I think nowadays there tends to be a push internally as well, from actual staff who are just passionate about it. Oh, you're on mute, Andrew. Sorry.
I'm muted as usual. Sorry. Thank you very much. I think it's probably time for us to try and move over to the other side here. We've been speaking a lot about companies and internally themselves, what they're doing. But let's think externally now, and probably let's go back to Suzy. Let's talk about knowing your audience. So, Suzy, in your experience, how can you make your messaging relevant to your target audience?
I think from a comms perspective, it's the same way that you'd approach any comms strategy, with the added level of transparency, more transparency and honesty than you sometimes get in your average sort of consumer brand campaign. It's the people who are using and buying what you're producing. That's one of your target audiences, but then also who else in your sector. So sometimes it's peers, sometimes it's investors. And what we're seeing with investors is that they're increasingly looking to invest in companies that are serious about their sustainability commitments. So, there are multiple audiences that you have to think about, and your comms approach is not always the same with all of those audiences. But I would say from a sustainability comms perspective, what they all have in common is that need for honesty and transparency. Consumers are much more savvy around sustainability than they were, particularly younger consumers. So, the potential to be caught out and accused of greenwashing is growing. People are becoming much more aware of companies really not being serious about their sustainability efforts and trying to cover up for weaknesses or gaps. So, definitely honesty, transparency, authenticity should really underpin any of your communication strategies out to any of your audiences.
Very interesting. I think I'd like to ask Darian the next question on this subject about audiences, because you will have had quite a lot of experience of this in terms of choosing communications platforms, choosing channels to deliver your messaging. Perhaps in general, perhaps in the case of Thai Union, what have you found? Maybe this is a huge question because you probably use a lot more. I full disclosure, AsiaWorks has done a bit of work with Thai Union before in the production of videos. But in terms of asking, what platforms have been most useful, have been most helpful to you in your communications efforts, Darian?
So I think to Suzy's point, it does depend on who you're trying to connect with. A lot of the communications I do is actually business to business. So we want to influence our customers, be able to communicate all of the work that we're doing and also the challenges. And for that, it's probably more direct communication. Social media is great for our brands. They tend to have a much stronger presence on social media. You can run competitions, you can engage on any number of things, sustainability efforts, and get people much more involved. It's a fallback, but we do also use the website to put a huge amount of information on there, because the challenge when you are trying to be transparent and to prove that you've actually done all of the work that you're saying that you are, it's that then there's a lot of evidence to be posting, and probably more than anyone ever wants to see. I think another great strategy to use is to work with partners. So very rapidly, Thai Union, I realized we didn't have all of the experience that we needed in-house, and we certainly didn't have the credibility. So just as Tom was saying about partners that he works with, we looked for credible partners, often within the NGO sphere, to work with. And then you've got the reach of what they're doing as well. So the Nature Conservancy, a big partner with us now. We have worked with WWF in the past, with Verite. So with this comes a level of credibility, but also access to different audiences that we as a company would not previously have had.
And I think that brings us beautifully back to Tom again. On this subject of partnerships. So, presumably that's quite a lot of the work that you do, Tom. And what role do those partnerships play in supporting companies' credentials?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got two different types of partners, generally speaking, and we have our clients, which are purchasing kind of the services that we are providing and generating that sustainable revenue. But on the other side, we've actually got partners who back us philanthropically to some extent, and sometimes it's a combination of the both. And at the moment, I think we've got about five major partners. And these are people who have identified specific projects that we're working on and really buy into the long-term goal of what we're trying to achieve. Particularly, obviously, in the ocean plastic sphere of things, predominantly, and they want to get on board and help us achieve our goals by maybe enabling a particular project or capacity building for the team and various other things. And when that comes with philanthropic money, I'm actually amazed that more than 50% of the time it doesn't come with a PR push out. Sometimes it doesn't. I've got no problem with that as long as we're not answerable to any of the partners that we are receiving funds from. I think that's something that we have to be completely transparent with. If you give us funds and you do something bad, like, we should still be able to call you out. It's not like you can buy good press and good sustainability from your partners. But I do think it opens, like Darian said, an opportunity to learn from other people in particular segments and very niche specializations in areas that could potentially help organizations as well. So it's a two-way stream. I think both have a lot to benefit. Obviously, on the organization side of things, we have loads to benefit because we can get projects up and running because of the generosity of our partners, and at the same time we get to affect our partners. One thing that I've struggled with a little bit ethically, I think, is a fair question, is if a partner comes to us who is not sustainable and not doing the right things, and they want to partner with us, and we see that there's a genuine want internally within that organization to improve and start going down this sustainability journey. How do we engage with them in that instance? Because I think it's very important to call out companies who are not doing anything whatsoever, but it's also very important not to hinder these companies' efforts, and really, where does that come in ethically in terms of us? Do we partner with a really bad company because it's got a wicked sustainability team that want to really push and drive change from the inside, or do we step back and go, actually, no, I'm sorry, you're over a red line of ours? But is that really constructive? And then we open ourselves up as an organization for greenwashing accusations if we go down that road as well. So it becomes infinitely complex, but yeah, it's definitely multifaceted, and I don't have all the answers, but I think it is something that we need more part. I think not 7 Clean Seas, but I think NGOs, social enterprises, everyone out there trying to actually dedicate themselves to making the changes that will have a physical benefit to this world. We need all the partners we can get, and all of the companies out there either need to do things internally or be partnering with partners to make some level of impact.
I'm on mute again, and our audience is echoing what you're saying. We've had a comment, I think it's a comment more than a question, from Suchitra Rai, who says businesses cannot go alone when they tell their sustainability stories. Client partnership is also a way to move forward along with employee outreach. Again, we're coming round to these themes of credibility. But again, kind of Suzy was talking about language, Darian was talking about language a bit. So I think that it's time to go back to Robin. And also I want to call out a statistic here as well, and I should have called it out at the beginning, but so it's a study that was led by the Competition and Markets Authorities and the Netherlands Authority of Consumers and Markets. Their latest sweep of almost 500 website sites found that 40% were posting potentially misleading environmental information. Websites ranged from environmental product and service providers to clothes, cosmetics, and food brands. The sweep found that 40% of the websites posted vague claims that failed to define eco, sustainable, or natural products. Others posted own brand sustainability levels that were not associated with accredited organizations, while many omitted key information such as the carbon footprint of products. Robin, have we got the language and the approach? Have we got that language and the approach to sustainability communications wrong?
Yeah, no, interesting one. So there's a lot of jargon in sustainability, and we're bombarded a lot with it. I think if I had £1 for every time I've heard the phrase sustainability is in our DNA, I think I'd be rich. Or also in marketing jargon, purpose is another word that's been banded out an awful lot. As to the credibility side and the sort of language that companies use, I think we struggle with that as well as a publication. I think sustainability can be very dry. And what we don't want to do is bore or depress our readers too much with a torrent of bad news. That's difficult, but we also have to be fair. And in telling company stories, what's difficult at disclosure as well, Tom was talking about partners. As a website, as a publication, we work with multinationals, big companies as well, who want to tell their story. And we have to be very careful about how to tell it fairly in a way that is honest as well, right? And also with our readers, crucially, we have to flag very clearly what is branded content and what isn't, so there's no misleading content. Fair enough if a company wants to talk about their zero plastic, zero carbon initiative, that's okay, but we do have to be careful in how we tell that story for them. But yeah, no, there's been, I mean, it's quite funny actually that the amount of sustainability jargon that's entering sort of mainstream language, mainstream lexicon, because people are using it so much now, I think, without understanding completely what these words mean. So, you know, words, I think we've talked some already, like materiality, externalities, additionality, and also sort of buzzwords as well that have picked up a few recently, like one I heard yesterday was skin inclusivity, like how the beauty industry is trying to include skin types of all kinds. And she-cession is another word that I heard recently about how the accession is unfairly affecting women. And there's other words like nature-based solutions, and like, what does that really mean? And then there's net zero and regenerative and all those sort of words. So yeah, I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done around what these words actually mean.
Skin inclusivity. Seriously,
yeah,
that's one of the best words I've ever heard in my life. That's my word of the. Thank you very much for that today. You need to learn a new thing every day. Skin inclusivity. Love it. Yeah. What was that all about then? So what did that come from, skin inclusivity?
It's actually from a marketing agency. But I mean, to be fair to marketing, the whole industry is built around coming up with words like this. I think some of them are interesting and useful, but skin inclusivity is about, yes, a word used by the beauty industry to describe skin types of all kinds of skin types, rather than the popularly displayed beautiful flawless skin complexion. So it's trying to be inclusive without. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's very interesting what you're talking about. I mean, it sounds very much that the language or the methodology that one might take to communicating sustainability, you can't take the traditional. It's almost like you can't take a traditional marketing approach, for example. You can't take a traditional sort of comms approach, if I'm understanding this correctly, that the approach has always to look, first of all, to the landscape around you, to credible fact-based, research-based components, and you really can't be thinking in the world of slogans. You can't be thinking in the world of sort of branding what you're doing. And I think that I have to put that question to Suzy. Would that be a fair analysis of what we're getting at today in this panel?
I think going back to sort of the fundamentals of good communications is about taking sometimes complex topics and issues and making them simple and understandable. But by doing that, still maintaining what makes it a compelling story. And I think that applies just as much to sustainability as to anything else, because if you can't help people understand, if you can't inspire people, then nothing changes. So, you know, I personally hate things like skin inclusivity, like they make me cringe. And I've worked in this industry for, 20 odd years. And every time I see something like that, I'm just like, oh, like it really, really makes me cringe, because I do think, there is beauty in simplicity. And with all comms, whether you're doing corporate comms, consumer comms, sometimes you've got a little bit more leeway, particularly if you're marketing a brand, then you can have a little bit more fun with it. But if you're doing corporate comms, for example, then at the root of that, it's got to be fact-based. You've got to start with your facts. And then how you tell the story is where the craft is there. But craft still has to be rooted in authenticity, not making up words, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that it's wonderful that you bring up, and I think everybody's mentioned it today, the idea of story. And earlier on, Darian, you were talking about the Thai union journey, and again, full disclosure, the work that we've done together, it has been very story-based, hasn't it? How important is that concept of story in communicating sustainability?
The story is very important, because actually what we do is deal with a lot of dry facts and data. So, our sustainability report is coming out next week. The back half of it is all of the data to be compliant with the Global Reporting Initiative. Very few people will read that and feel inspired by what Thai Union is doing, but it is necessary for transparency and to show progress. What people, I think, engage with is particularly seeing the story and other people. And as you've mentioned, we've worked together. One of the great videos that we did with AsiaWorks was we put satellite receivers on vessels in Thailand so that you could get catch information, which is important for the seafood industry and traceability, but also it was so that we could give workers a voice. So the fishers who are going out to sea could connect back on land and connect to their loved ones. Now, I could just give you the bandwidth of the satellite receivers we put on there and the technical details, but AsiaWorks helped us do videos to tell the story, and you saw a wife communicating with her husband while he was out at sea. And it really brings it to life that, okay, these sustainability stories, yes, it's serving a purpose, but they impact people. And when it's impacting people or impacting environments, then I think that's when you start to have your audiences care about what you're doing. And it's not all about consumers caring. For us, we want our company, our staff, to believe that Thai Union is doing the right thing and that we're helping to change people's lives. We want to engage the government so that the government can help support these kinds of initiatives that we've trialed. So there's a lot more to telling a sustainability story, I think, than purely marketing.
Wonderful, wonderful. We've received another question from the audience, and I think this might be quite a good one for Tom, because I think, Tom, you might have done this before, or perhaps been involved in this before. How does an organization select sustainability goals from the SDG? An example of an organization that does it really well, from identifying goals, communication, and delivery. Any thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's two different ways that this occurs. Now, what we see time and time again, for us, we're an ocean cleanup organization. Therefore, people in the shipping industry, people in potentially the fishing industry and anything that's related to water or water conservation seem to be the people that track us down because it's relevant to them. One of our kind of really early partners was Marina Bay Sands, and that was because they were owned by Las Vegas Sands. Las Vegas has water scarcity and therefore has a foundation called Drop by Drop Foundation that focuses on supporting organizations and causes that are relevant to water. And that's really the thing that we see the most in terms of who we're interacting with. But then you've got the flip side, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about having internal champions within businesses. I think very much a business can have its macro SDGs that are in line with the business that it takes, that it does day in, day out. But it can also have its kind of secondary SDGs that get pushed by people internally within the business who are just passionate, whether that's things like gender equality or no poverty or partnerships, and the things that are completely maybe not that transmissible to the business that they're doing day in, day out. They push it, and to be honest, it works it works really well for us because often our clients are not directly related to the ocean, but the people who work there are really passionate. So I would say it comes from both levels, both macro kind of company level objectives, but also internally with the staff and just what they're passionate about.
Lovely, thank you. We've got another question that's come in from Eva Sogbanu again. I'm sorry if I keep on pronouncing your name wrong. It's for Suzy. To what extent are your clients linking their corporate purpose to their sustainability goals, or are they treating those things separately?
Unfortunately, not necessarily clients, but brands and companies do sometimes see them as separate things, because that's a misunderstanding and also a wave of interest in this concept of purpose. As Robin alluded to earlier, you know, it is sort of bandied around so much now. Well, we've got to have a corporate purpose. We've got to have a corporate purpose. For us, purpose works when it's actually at the heart of your business. It is what your business is about. Why is your business there? What does it do? Why does it exist? And naturally, we feel that it should be extrinsically linked to sustainability, because if you're there and you want to do good in the world, then of course there is a link to sustainability. But I do think the two sort of terms bandied around can be a bit confusing for companies. And I think both purpose and sustainability are both concepts that are growing in interest from brands and organizations. You know, they see other brands talking about it, they want to start talking about it, but there's a lot of misunderstanding and confusion out there. I'm not a great fan of the word purpose. I think it can be very misleading, and is also in itself a massive target for purpose washing as opposed to greenwashing.
Purpose washing. That's a great expression. That's another great expression from today. What about this term green hush? What is green hush? Something that we've been hearing quite a lot recently, Suzy.
So green hush is a term that a lot of publications have been using to describe this reticence, this nervousness from companies to start talking about their sustainability achievements for all of the reasons we've talked about today. You know, maybe they don't have the experience and the expertise within the company to get that foundational sustainability strategy right. You know, they're nervous around using certain terminology, as we've also talked about today. Sustainability is awash with jargon, and a lot of it quite complex to get your head around if you've never sort of been in that world before. So that's what green hush is about. It's about that nervousness of actually putting yourself out there and saying you're doing something. And I also think a lot of companies feel like they can't go out and talk about their sustainability achievements until they've got all of those boxes ticked. And as Darian said earlier, that's impossible because things are changing all the time. Things are evolving. You solve one challenge, another one pops up. So you're never going to get to perfect because things are going to keep changing. And there's absolutely no reason why you can't communicate about any point of your sustainability journey, as long as, and I do feel like a bit of a stuck record, but as long as you're being honest and transparent about the way you're communicating, where you're at that point.
Absolutely. We are running out of time, so there's so much more that we could be talking about. This is a great discussion. I think that it makes sense for us to finish on a very practical and useful note, and I'd like everybody to give their answers to this. And it's really still on this subject of greenwashing and what to do about it. But I'm looking for a little tidbit of best practice and practical useful information from everyone. Let's start with Darian, perhaps, and let's ask the same question. How is the best way to react to accusations of greenwashing? What would your advice be?
My advice would be to share your evidence of what has actually happened and why you've communicated a particular story. And perhaps it gives you the opportunity to tell the more nuanced story rather than the headline. So look at it as an opportunity rather than a threat to go into a subject more deeply. And hopefully, if you haven't been greenwashing, you do actually have the evidence and the facts to back up why you're talking about it, and perhaps some more details about and what else you intend to do. So maybe look at it as an opportunity to start a broader conversation.
Absolutely, yeah, very good. Tom, you were talking earlier about, sort of sticky situations that you might find yourself in with clients and the things that they do. What's your advice in terms of reacting to accusations of greenwashing?
Yeah, I think a little bit to mirror what Darian said, like if people are not greenwashing, they're going to have the evidence to back it up and just lay it out on a plate. And what I would say is, when you are making these, these claims of sustainability, I would preempt the whole thing and just make sure you're giving maximum disclosure from the very beginning.
Wonderful. Robin, I'm sure that you've seen lots of this, and I'm sure that you've maybe made accusations yourselves. What would your advice be?
Yeah, lots of I talk about sustainability, marketing sustainability in general, which I don't see a lot of, is admitting mistakes and conceding there are challenges. Every sustainability report you tend to read is perfect magically, and there's very few companies that talk about challenges and mistakes. One I'll single out as Unilever. They actually admitted that they had a problem and didn't hit one of their targets. Immediately, as a journalist, they gain credibility because they're being really honest about the challenges that they face. So as much as possible, honesty in marketing, I think, goes a long way to establishing credibility. Yeah.
Thank you. And finally, Suzy, I'm sure this is a situation that you found yourself in. How do you react, and what kind of advice do you give your clients in terms of accusations of greenwashing?
I would say that if that happens to you and you haven't got the data to back up what you've put out there, just hold your hands up and admit you made a mistake. As Robin says, you gain much more credibility and trust from an audience by being honest than you do in trying to cover something up, so just hold your hand up. People make mistakes, people get things wrong, and people accept that. What they don't accept is when you try to cover something up.
Thank you so much. Well, we've run over just a little bit, and unfortunately that brings us to the end of our panel today. I want to say a huge thank you on behalf of the Chamber to all of you, to Suzy, Robin, to Darian, and to Tom for your time today. Your opinions, your information that you've given us has been invaluable, and it's been a great, honest, open, transparent, and credible discussion. I'm sure everyone will agree. And thanks very much to our audience for all of your questions and comments. We were able to get through all of them today. Thank you so much. And also thanks very much to the Chamber team, to especially to Sabina, who's helped us organize this today. As ever, absolutely fantastic. And all that's left for me to do is tell you about what's coming up. So we've got the AGM coming up. That is tomorrow. That will be held online. I hope that all chamber members have signed up for that. We've got Shaping the Hybrid Work Future, a webinar coming up on the 25th of May. Unfortunately, we weren't able to have our physical networking the other night, which was such a shame. But there will be a virtual speed network happening on the 10th of June. And finally, another webinar, Future Cities, Food Resilience Through Climate Change. And with that, all that there is to be said is thanks very much for joining us, and goodbye for now.